Hello, everyone that may be watching. My name is Rajiv Raman, and I am doing my IPP project presentation on equal pay for equal work. I just want to thank Dr. Green once again for allowing us to do these projects remotely, and I would like to go ahead and get started. Okay, so today's agenda, we're going to be talking about quite a bit of things here. So we're going to be talking about the definition of what equal pay for equal work really is, some background information from the past and in the last decade as well. We're going to look at some applicable laws towards this particular topic. We're going to look at the perspective or a perspective of why this disparity may exist today and how has equal pay for equal work evolved as well. Some closing thoughts, and then we'll just go ahead and look at the references. So let's go ahead and move forward. So let's look at the definition. What does equal pay for equal work really mean? So according to the Department of Labor, equal work does not mean identical jobs. Rather, they must be substantially equal in overall job content, even if the position titles are different. In order to be considered substantially equal, the job duties must be closely related or very much alike. In other words, you could have a job as somebody else. Your titles may be different, but essentially, if you do the same exact thing, you are entitled to the Equal Pay for Equal Work Act. Now, let's go ahead and set the stage about some background information from the past. Now, I'm going to make a very bold statement, but I will provide support for this statement. Now, there has always been inequality between men and women. So let's just go ahead and think about some of the things that women have had to go through just in this country in the US. So in the US, for the longest period of time, women were not allowed to vote. Going forward, women also had a very hard time getting rights to education as well, specifically in the 1800s and the 1900s as well. And on top of that, here we are, before women were not even allowed to work. Now, according to the U.S. Department of Labor, in 1920, the law gave the Bureau the duty to formulate standards and policies which shall promote the welfare of wage-earning women, improve their working conditions, increase their efficiency, and advance the opportunities for profitable employment. Now, this is essentially saying that women now can work, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be treated fairly in this and that they're not going to face any hardships after this. So this was just the first step of allowing women to even get into that space, that headspace of getting paid equally. This is just the first step. Now, in the last decade, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, in 2012, it was reported that weekly median earnings for women who worked full-time was 82.8% than their male counterparts. Now, what does this prove? Essentially, this means is that there is a wage gap. There is, in fact, a wage gap strictly based upon gender. Okay, so we were just talking about equal pay for equal work. In this sense, we can clearly see through the Bureau of Labor Statistics that, in fact, that there is a wage gap still, and it still exists today. Now let's go ahead and look at some applicable laws towards equal pay for equal work. Now, the Fair Labor Standards Act was just one of the first laws that really set the stage for equality in a working economy. However, this didn't necessarily mean that it was geared towards women. So the Fair Labor Standards Act established minimum wage, overtime pay, record keeping, child labor standards, and this pretty much worked for the private sector and in federal, state, and local government. So this was just one of the first laws that kind of helped set up how working conditions should really be and how people should be paid accordingly for that. And it wasn't until the Equal Pay Act of 1963 that really gender was discussed. Now, this was one of the first federal anti-discrimination laws that addressed wage differences between genders, essentially. The act made it illegal to pay men and women working in the same place different salaries for similar work. Now, it's funny that this law had been created during a time which was World War II, when plenty of men had to go out for war and their jobs had to be replaced by women in the meantime. Now, these women that were working were paid significantly less than the men were who were working there at that time. Now, essentially to prevent employers from undercutting future wages for men, the Equal Pay Act was basically created saying that we aren't going to underpay the men, so men are going to be paid equally, which kind of also gave some power to the women as well to get paid, accordingly. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that it transitioned well, which we'll look at a little bit further later in this presentation. Now, Title VII was, a blanket title. However, looking at it from the gender discrimination point of view, it's basically a law on the federal level that protects individuals from discrimination based upon sex, race, color, religion, and national origin. So it made it illegal for an employer to discriminate against individuals in hiring, firing, and other terms and conditions of employment, such as promotions, raises, and other job opportunities because of their sex. Now, this law does in fact exist. However, this does not mean that in the workplace that there will be things done to you that, technically does not break this law, but makes work significantly harder for you, especially for women. For example, there are definitely many quid pro quo cases out there. And think about before, people could actually go into a courtroom and, say that they were assaulted or sexually harassed or whatever it may be, that all of those cases still exist today. So to think that obviously it's illegal, the cases before people actually felt open enough to talk about that conversation is unfathomable to think about, really. Let's go on to the next slide here. So let's take a little closer look. So based on what we've learned in class about discrimination at the workplace, let's take a look at what's written according to the U.S. Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. The law forbids discrimination when it comes to any aspect of employment, including hiring, firing, pay, job assignments, promotions, layoff, trainings, fringe benefits, and any other term or condition of employment. So why does it still happen? Why is there still a wage gap? Why is women still getting paid less for equal work, essentially? Here's one perspective, which is from Margaret Fisher. So her article, Equal Pay for Equal Work Legislation, states, women workers have tended to look upon their jobs as a temporary stopgap until marriage. Since they expected to work only for a few years, they were willing to accept lower wages. In many cases, women have found it difficult to secure jobs in industry, and in order to get work at all, they have been willing to take low pay. Now, this was written in the past, obviously in the late to mid 1900s. Okay, so what we can take away actually from this is that not so many things technically have changed. Lawfully, yes, but technically and in the mindset of things, a lot of things haven't really changed. So clearly there's, a distinction between when a law is actually written and how it's adopted in the future by the actual people that are supposed to abide by it. Now, how has equal pay for equal work evolved today? Now, job evaluations today are one of the biggest reasons on why there is less wage disparities than there were before. It may not be perfect, however, it is becoming a topic discussed now by both men and women. So job evaluations essentially are saying that here is a particular job, and the content of this job, regardless of who is performing it, deserves this much salary. For example, if there is a professor who is going to teach biology, regardless of whether they're male or female, the job content of being a professor, in that there is an obligation to teach, an obligation to grade, and to perform an agenda that everyone can hopefully understand and be able to pass that class with, or be able to get the information necessary to pass that class with. So because that job has that content, it deserves a particular salary or a range of salary that it may require. Versus if you're a male, you're going to get paid this much, or if you're a female, you're going to get paid this much. So according to the article Equal Pay for Equal Work, it was stated that job evaluation trumpeted the phrase equal pay for equal work and opened the door to contemporary equality discourse. The idea that men and women who do equal work deserve the same pay has since become a generalized social norm. So because of job evaluations, essentially, that discourse is now starting to become more available, and that conversation is being brought to light, essentially. So here's some of the closing thoughts on what we can do as a society and as both people that are seeing this firsthand. What are things that we can do to kind of combat this unequal pay for work situation that may currently still exist in many different areas? So what we can do is support both men and women who have fallen victim to it. Nowadays, it may not just be women who fall into the unequal pay situation. Some men may also fall into this situation. So we must show support to both sides of where this disparity exists. In addition, we cannot be afraid to speak out when this behavior is projected onto others. If we see that happening, we must take initiative to actually speak out and have that conversation come out so that we can essentially come to an agreement of what actually is morally and ethically right to do. And finally, we cannot allow this topic to be swept under the rug because it still exists today. It may exist in different forms. However, it still does exist according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics as well. So I just wanted to close out with those thoughts. And I do want to go over my references really quick as well. So I did have 2 peer-reviewed references inside this presentation. And then I also had a couple of references from .gov websites and other credible resources as well. So once again, thank you so much for allowing me to do this presentation remotely. This was Rajiv Raman, and my topic was equal pay for equal work.